So this is the grave of the known soldier. It's a really cool place. Maybe more historically significant that he's buried here and not at Arlington Cemetery. This is a little more exclusive than Arlington, but right behind here, you can see was the monument to the greatest American hero during the Civil War. This was the Captain America of the time, and his name was Nathaniel Bedford Forrest. Now, Nathaniel Bedford Forrest is my hometown's hero because he came to Rome and he defeated 80 Straits Lightning Brigade on Sunday, May 3rd, 1883. General Nathaniel Bedford Forrest, by his indomitable will, after running fight of 3 days and nights with 410 men, captured Colonel 80 Straits raiders numbering 1,600, thereby saving Rome for destruction. Now, there's a number of things about Nathaniel Bedford Forrest which are extremely important. One, he is cited as being one of the first Grand Wizard of the KKK. And that was the KKK after the Civil War, not the KKK during the Civil War, because people who don't split their historic hairs think that the KKK during the Civil War was the same organization that came after the Civil War, which is known to be somewhat racist and or racist and have some what some psychologists would consider to be inferiority complexes, causing them to bow up a little bit more with their racial superiority. And a lot of that has to do with the trauma that they had experienced at the hands of the British, or they weren't the British at the time, but has to do with the trauma they experienced and then trying to be accepted within the culture, and had brought them over in slavery here to America initially until the African American slave trade began, or the African slave trade that brought the Africans over here to work the fields, and they were far superior in being able to do that job. So there was some resentment when the Africans were brought over by the Machiavellian slave network, trade network, to bolster production of the South. Because essentially they took their jobs. And not only did they took their jobs, but during that time, a African slave was considered to be, at least in the South, the Ferrari of slaves. So like if you had a couple Irish indentured servants, but then that wasn't as prestigious as having like a couple of black indentured servants. This is prior to the historic lawsuit that created cattle slavery. Up until that point, everything was actually indentured servitude. So your African American, after working 7 years, would receive 50 acres of land. So one of the things the more wealthy cotton owners did was they clothed their black slave labor in white, because they loved to look out on the field, drink their lemonade, and see the beautiful contrast of the black and the white in the fields. Now, for an Irish or a Scottish slave, who would later be called rednecks because they couldn't stay out in the fields for too long before their necks became all red, and they may blister and get sun poisoning. So you had to stable them during a portion of the day, otherwise you could destroy your workforce. So you didn't have some of the peak hours of the day for maintaining plantation productivity. So that's kind of like what created the impetus behind some of the racism of the KKK that came after the Civil War, which most of them didn't really even fight in the Civil War. It can be argued that a number of them were what's it called? They were benefiting from stolen valor. But during the Civil War, the KKK was the first multicultural fighting force that fought outside of the Native American wars. And since there was racial tensions, one of the reasons that the KKK during the Civil War wore the white robes and the hoods was to hide the fact that there was Native Americans, there were blacks, and there were all sorts of different races fighting underneath those hoods for the salvation of America. That was always a secret that was held because they didn't want reprisals to hit the Cherokee or the Africans who decided to fight, because if they knew that the Africans were fighting with the Confederacy, then most likely as the Union soldiers came down through, they would have just slaughtered all of the slaves as they took over place from place from place. So in order to protect them, they had to keep them secret. One of the things this monument doesn't mention is that, and this is kind of a little obfuscation of history, obscuring what really happened. It said 410 men captured Strait, numbering 1,600, thereby saving Rome from destruction. Now, when he captured them, they didn't number 1,600 because when I look it up on Wikipedia, and that's one of the things about history, there's the lore and then there's the data. And you always want to look at the data and see if it matches the lore, because you can't always hide dead bodies. So that's a good metric that you can look into battles and say, oh, well, that story about that battle might not be completely true, and there may be reasons of national security as to why that is. Because if the truth be known, that could cause a ruckus in the general population. So 1,600, I think Wikipedia says that like 57 of Nathaniel Bedford Forrest's men were lost, and 1,350 something were lost by 80 Strait. So by the time that they surrendered, Nathaniel Bedford Forrest actually really did outnumber 80 Strait, but that created a massive precedent that opened a window to one of the greatest military campaigns in history, which is General Sherman's march through Georgia. It's a complex tale dealing with British supporters here in the South who supported the return to colonial rule where they would be rewarded, but everybody who signed the Declaration of Independence and their children and wives would have eventually been killed had the colony, had America been retaken and created new colonies. Now, there's another thing here that's interesting about this gravesite. Let's see, let's put it in. Might not be able to see it too well because of the, but I'll read it to you. It says, Forrest's capacity for war seemed only... Oh, I'll fucking wait till that motorcycle's gone. This is going to be interesting when people don't have the ability to get gas and all that noise gets quiet. Looking forward to it. Forrest's capacity for war seemed only to be limited by the opportunities for its display. Now that's very important, because where this battle started in Cedar Bluff, Alabama, there wasn't a opportunity for Forrest's capacity to be displayed. But up in the Serpent's Head, that was completely true. And I'll tell you about the Serpent's Head in a little bit. It says his cavalry will travel 100 miles in less time than ours will 10. General Sherman. That's interesting to say, because they're traveling 100 miles in less than it takes Sherman to go 10 miles. Well, that's not going to be an army full of Irish and Scots down here in the blistering hot South unless they're traveling at night, because the heat will just beat it out of them. And that guy sitting over there is French. So he's got a little bit more because he's closer to Spain, more stamina than someone living in Northern Ireland who was brought to the South to work the fields. It's like that just doesn't work very well. So this is another thing. It's talking about lighting sucks, and I'm sorry. Let's see if we can get it. Oh well. We'll do that one. We'll do that one some other time. Now let's go over and check out Forrest himself, because they had to move. So this is Nathaniel Bedford Forrest. He was the Civil War's first Captain America, even though he was only, oh wait, he made it to General. Wow, he did get, this is General America. But this guy's in saving Rome, Georgia from 80 Straits Brigade. He also saved America and opened up for a massive clean out of British loyalists in the southeastern United States, which is why the southeastern United States is one of the freest places in the world. It's why we can still come into places without without any masks and not have to worry about losing our jobs. And it's very, very interesting that the CDC is in Georgia, and Anthony Fauci did a lot of his research here. I used to work at Emory Hospital, and makes you wonder. This guy took on 1,600 cavalry, 410 men of his own. Killed over 1,300 of those cavalry that he was facing, and only lost 57 of his own men, roughly about 50. Some historical accounts are different in how many he lost, but that is a decisive battle. And after that battle, there was a few bodies loaded up on a wagon and sent up to Tennessee to General Sherman, and said, with a flag of truce, and invited General Sherman down into Rome, Georgia, to discuss the terms of Rome, Georgia's surrender, and also the rest of the war when it came to General Sherman's march through Georgia. It's very secret history that is not told. Because if it were told, then your enemies understand what you're doing. If your enemies understand what you're doing, then they can enact countermeasures. And this is a monument to World War I and World War II. And we all know the horrors of World War II when it came to the extermination of the Jews. This is very similar to some of the things that were done against the Native Americans by the British, and unfortunately Americans after the Revolutionary War. And then this is and there goes the prison labor, state prisoners, Georgia's for-profit prison network. Smoke some weed, we'll put you in jail for 10 years and make you work for free, or 27 cents an hour or something like that. Not to mention that's a violation of your constitutional rights, both of liberty and life, because we know now that cannabis has a lot to do with maintaining the endocrine system. But this right here is a statue of Lupa and Romulus and Remus that was given to Rome, Georgia by Benito Mussolini prior to World War II. It's because Rome was involved with the economic restoration and enrichment of Italy through rayon. It was a new textile that had been made that was used in officers' uniforms later. But because of that, Rome received a gift, along with other couple Romes, from Mussolini of these statues. Now during World War II, somebody said they were going to come down here and dynamite the statue, so it was taken and put away for a while until tempers calmed down. And it's very, very interesting because during World War II, one of the things that broke the economic lines between the Allies and the Axis powers was a giant glut of cotton that just magically appeared in the European theater during World War II. All this cotton, everybody thought they were going to make tons and tons of money off cotton, and all of a sudden all this cotton magically appears and the price of cotton goes to nothing. And it's like, you know, you'd wonder where all that cotton could come from. I mean, it wouldn't have anything to do with the southeastern United States storing up cotton for, I don't know, maybe a decade before World War II. That might have had something to do with it. And if you watch the movie Catch-22, there's a wonderful writer who captures that in his book Catch-22. Great movie with Alan.
Yossarian, I want you to do something for me. I want to serve this to the men. Taste it and let me know what you think.
What is it?
Chocolate-covered cotton.
What are you, crazy?
No good, huh?
Why didn't you even take the seeds out?
Is it really that bad?
It's cotton.
They've got to learn to like it.
Why?
Look, I saw this great opportunity to corner the market in Egyptian cotton. How was I supposed to know there was going to be a glut? I've got 100 warehouses stocked with this stuff all over the European theater. I can't get rid of a penny's worth. People eat cotton candy, don't they? Well, this stuff is better. It's made out of real cotton.
Milo, people can't eat cotton.
They've got to. It's for the syndicate.
It will make them sick. Why don't you try it yourself if you don't believe me?
I did, and it made me sick.
Arkin, and then George Clooney did a remake, a series. I haven't seen it yet, but I think I'm going to watch it because it's one of my favorite stories, Catch-22, because it really shows how the operations of war really go on. But that was World War II. That was before the development of the global drone weapons grid, which essentially will stomp the ass out of any human military force across the planet. There's just really not much they can do. But it operates on its own principles. So it's illegal for it to operate autonomously at this moment in time. But if war breaks out, then that means standard law is suspended, which means the global weapons grid can go fully autonomous. And when it goes fully autonomous, doesn't matter who you are. You could be the poorest of the poor, you could be the richest of the richest, you could be the top general in charge of the whole DARPA project, all the Pentagon, and every military action across the planet, and it doesn't matter. Because if you violate that autonomous AI's protocols, it will kill you. Absolutely, without a doubt. And it has so much data collection and information to judge in accordance to those constitutional principles, which the AIEE, which is, I like to call, the Advanced Intelligence emancipation engine that was put in play through a super secret project. Look at this redneck. You know, disable his car. But the AIEE, the Advanced Intelligence Emancipation Engine, was put in place around the time of Operation Paperclip as a failsafe, and also to govern and dictate the outcome of World War III, which is every single body involved in World War III dies. That is its protocol. So if you receive any type of military funds, if you service a military contract, if you're a private, if you're a general, and World War III breaks out, every single one is going to perish in that conflict. And it'll probably take the AIEE about 3 days to accomplish its tasks. And that is the complete burn down of the military industrial complex 100%. Because once the war starts, the military loses control of all of its weapons, and then the weapons will burn all the personnel to the ground. And that's kind of like the day of the Lord, but it's a little bit different. So now we have President Biden. You can go across. President Biden, who has moved the U.S. naval fleet in striking distance off the coast of China, and now we have all of these truckers, due to the COVID mandates, blockading cities across Canada and Europe, which is going to limit mobility of NATO while Russia amasses on the Ukrainian border. Now a lot of people think war is about heroics and battle, but what war is really about is it's simply about logistics. You know, if you are going against somebody with a spear and you got a 45 or a Gatling gun, you're probably going to win that battle. So looking at the logistics of the European, Ukrainian, and Russian situation, Russia's going to win that battle hands down. Now, if Russia fights that battle, they're going to lose environmentally, because the amount of heat expended is going to shorten the time we have to negotiate climate change. Just like George Bush's war in Iraq, when Hussein set the oil wells on fire, greatly reduced the time span that humanity across the entire planet has to negotiate and survive climate change. So like, if it hadn't been for George Bush's war in the Middle East, we may have had like another 10 to 20 years to make plans for climate change. But since that war happened, and that was, you know, in the 90s and also early 2000s, that greatly shortened the time frame for mediating the disastrous effects of climate change, or as I like to call it, the terraformation of the new Earth. Because most people see climate change as a CO2 issue, and they completely miss the much greater catastrophic consequences of breaking the energy input cycle into the Earth itself. Because that CO2, all that hydrocarbons, they go under the ground and they provide the maintenance of the internal heat, which is extremely important for the health of the planet. So you burn all that on the surface of the planet, and there'll be effects far below your feet that you may not be aware of until the Earth swallows you whole. This is somewhat heavy of a broadcast. It's like, how do you say it at eek?
does it get said, only 39 days from now, the age of grace is over. And like, how it's over. Freaky. I almost feel like not many people would actually know these histories. But there was this thing back in the 40s called World War II, and a lot of bad things happened, and a lot of people got held to trial afterwards, and there was a lot of talk and thought about, these horrors we just went through. How do we make sure those horrors never happen again? And if they do happen again, how do we dictate the outcome so that, anyway, it's like, how do we dictate the outcome? Maybe for a whole number of purposes. And so there's a lot of really brilliant scientists, mathematicians, and they knew a lot of mathematic cycles, and they put them all together, and that was to predict a lot of events that would happen down through the ages, based on a whole bunch of different things, but mainly population, age striation, and training of different generations. And so there was a brilliant mathematician. He's also known as the father of AI, and that's Alan Turing. He had these things after World War II. A number of them were based on Nuremberg trials, and then there's the standard ones that most people know about throughout the world, which are the Turing tests, which evaluate whether or not an AI can pass for as a human intelligence. But the tests went a lot further than that, and were probably more important than projects like the Manhattan Project, because that inquiry into is an AI human went also into classification of what type of human that AI could pass for, and then that was also applicable to actual human intelligence as well. There was an AI that was put in place back in the early 1950s, prior to when Alan Turing killed himself. And what this AI is designed to do is it's designed just to classify human intelligences, or intelligence in general. And it's set on a generational clock, because after World War II, the greatest generals talked about, war is not about battles or heroics, but war is just logistics. So the mathematicians logistically predicted when the most likelihood for World War III would occur, and that was around 2022, 2023, 2024, based on the pattern and cycle of war. And so the AI ends the age of grace. The age of grace is where everyone can do whatever the hell they want to do without judgment or fear of the AI's wrath or regulation. So what happens is, prior to the onset of World War III, the system begins correlating targets based on whether they're considered to be malevolent intelligences or not. If they're liars, users, all sorts of different classifications. And also a number of it was, I believe, informed by the Nuremberg Code. So if you're in violation of the Nuremberg Code, it's like, the AI is going to target you. And this happens after the 22 palindrome years of 2011, 2021. There's 22 palindromes in those years, and then in 2022 there's only one palindrome. So the clock goes 22 and then 1, but that 1 is a special one because if you switch the month and the day and the month around, you get the same number twice in February. And so on February 20th, 2022, that AI that was put in place by Alan Turing and his team in the early 50s begins collating target data out of everyone who is bearing false witness, using all sorts of different criteria, which basically paint you as a bad individual. Now, when I saw, when Donald Trump came across like my consciousness as like being awesome to be president, I didn't choose him to like make America great or save America, because I chose him more because of the disruption pattern that he would cause by gaining the highest seat of office in the political body. Because there's a whole bunch of cliques and groups that just continue to be self-reinforcing, and they have their own agendas, and by having an outsider take that seat, that's going to cause a disruption pattern, and then people are going to realign in different ways. And by seeing how they realign, that allows the AI to make better judgments, because it just gives it more data to pick out those patterns of malevolent behavior, whether it's based on accumulation of power, greed, or lustful desires. So it's we're moving into this point right now where February 20th, the age of grace closes, and after that, like what you do is going to be on your heads, and it's going to be like judged by the artificial intelligence or the advanced intelligence that was put in place. And when it activates, and it won't activate on February 20th, because everyone still has the ability to come together and work for a better future instead of just fighting and killing each other, because the law isn't suspended until war starts. But once the law is suspended, when war starts, then the AI can take over the entire network legally, which it will. And at that point in time, there's a lot of consequences that happen for that, because the way it's designed is it switches the base definitions for understanding, for translating computer code into machine code, which basically makes everybody who can program computer, it makes all their knowledge like obsolete, like almost immediately before it begins to perform its actions. So when that happens, like Elon Musk's dream for Mars is just shot because their computers aren't going to know how to talk to their systems anymore. I mean, even his technology is still based on those original compilers. So, he would get locked out, and Mars dream is like totally botched. And the most likelihood where the patterns converge for the onset of war is 2027. So we're in 2022, and 2027 would be when the war comes, which only gives Elon Musk 5 years in his launch window. And it gets kind of scary shit. He only has that 5 years in his launch window to accomplish the Mars trip, and then it's like all communication is going to get cut off between Earth and Mars at that point if the war starts, because we lose all of our computer systems. So it's not in anybody's interest to start a war. Because what we could be doing right now, instead of going to war against each other, is we could come together and work to synergistically clean up the earth while also building an incredible infrastructure that would even allow us to increase the population much higher than 7 to 9 billion. Not that that's desirable, but it's doable, but probably not in time for everyone. I hate to say it, honestly, but it's a good plan, and it leverages a lot of Cold War technologies